Hi everyone, my name is Jeff Starr, and this is a video about 5 essential albums by Frank Zappa. For those who don't know, Frank Zappa was a highly prolific and non-conventional rock musician, classical composer, band leader, guitarist, satirist, filmmaker, and cigarette smoker. He also drank a lot of coffee too. Frank Zappa passed away in 1993, leaving behind a long list of albums. Currently, there are more than 100 albums, and there are more being released all the time. So it can be pretty hard to know where to start. I'm a big Zappa fan, like I said. I'm such a big fan that when the Zappa Family Trust released this box set celebration of Zappa's first album, Freak Out, this is called Mofo. It's a 4-disc box set, right? And inside this box set, there's this little thing here. And inside here, there's a list of all the names of people who contributed to help make this possible. And my name is in there. So, I'm a fan. Anyways, thanks to streaming music services like YouTube, Apple Music, Amazon, Spotify, it's super easy to listen to all of these albums. Oh, I should put my album on the wall. This is an album called Shake Your Booty that I actually, this is a first pressing of this album, and I actually garbage picked this because I was walking down the street in New York and I saw this little section here sticking out of a trash pile with some clothes or whatever. And I went, oh, is that the Zappa Shake Your Booty vinyl? And it was. So I'm going to put this in the background because Frank should be here to say hello to. Hi, Frank. Okay, so like I said, I'm a big Frank Zappa fan, so there we go. Okay, so let's get started. Number 1, Chunga's Revenge. For years, I always thought Chunga's Revenge was sort of the perfect starting place. And the reason I say that is because it contains a great sort of mix of everything from crazy guitar solos to really funky rhythm sections. There's references to Life on the Road, which is sort of a common Zappa theme. The opening track is Transylvania Boogie, and it's a really far-out, funky guitar solo with a very classic Zappa outside-the-box approach, which is followed immediately by a very straight-up blues, which really shows how Frank can jump into a genre and really own it. This album is also from a period in Zappa's career where he had recruited the singers Howard Kalin and Mark Volman from the 60s pop band The Turtles. So for bizarre, complicated, weird legal reasons, Howard and Mark, they weren't allowed to use their real names. So instead, they were billed as the Phosphorescent Leech and Eddie, or Flo and Eddie. They have their own albums that they released under that name later. That's for another video. This was also a very unique time frame because this is when Zappa got attacked on stage by a fan, and he fell and he broke his leg. He damaged his voice box. And for the rest of his life, his one leg was a little bit shorter than the other. And then his voice was lower. And then there's an official bootleg called Swiss Cheese Fire. And this is, if you know the Deep Purple song Smoke on the Water, if you listen to the lyrics of that song, it talks about it's a concert, and an idiot shoots a flare gun, and it burns the whole place to the ground, and then there's smoke on the water. Well, that concert, where the guy shoots off the flare gun, that's Zappa's concert. So if you listen to Swiss Cheese Fire, which is now an official bootleg, you can hear that concert in full. It's a great concert too. The audio quality on the bootleg's great. And it has a very iconic ending, let's say, that of course, you know, you can't go into a guitar center without hearing someone play dun 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 dun. You can listen to the show that Smoke on the Water is based on. So between the fire, breaking his leg, and lowering his voice, kind of a doomed tour. This is a crucial period of music making for Zappa. So you get a lot of iconic tunes. There's these great vocal harmonies, and it's sort of tossed together with a little bit of sophomore humor about life on the road and sex and all that stuff. And Chunga's Revenge contains sort of like the least amount of that humor from this time period. So I think it's sort of a good place to sort of dip your toes. Number 2, Apostrophe. So Frank Zappa didn't write a lot of albums that sort of play from start to the end as sort of one big poppy, just, you know, standard rock album or something. Commercially acceptable. But Apostrophe is about as close as you're going to get. It's a really fantastic album. It's also the first time that Zappa had a tune that broke into the Billboard Top 100. It wasn't the last time, but it was the first time that happened. There's a series of short, catchy songs, peppered in with sort of Zappa's musical arrangements that are very unique. There's a humor side to it. The most well-known tune is called Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, so you can sort of get an idea there. Also, Jack Bruce, the bassist from Cream, makes a guest appearance on the title track, which is something that Jack Bruce oddly denied for years, although if you listen, it's really clearly him playing. Zappa also wasn't someone who did a lot of sharing of songwriting credits, so it would have been very weird for him to just decide to add Jack Bruce to that song if he actually hadn't played on it. Keyboard great, George Duke, he contributes a song to this album by the name of Uncle Remus. Zappa wasn't afraid to do songs that dealt with, politics and racism, but then there's also songs on this album about pancakes, so there's like a mix of material. Musically, it's sort of hard to sum this up other than to say that every time I listen to it, I'm constantly impressed. I'm always pulled into it. And if you like it, make sure you check out its sister album, Overnight Sensation. For this, it was very hard to choose between, should I tell you to listen to Apostrophe first or Overnight Sensation? Apostrophe has a song about stinky feet. So that won out. I think it's just a slightly better album. Number 3, Hot Rats. So this is one of the first jazz rock fusion albums. It was released shortly before the genre-defying Bitches Brew by Miles Davis. So Zappa shows that he was pretty ahead of the times, or at least very in sync with it. This is one of the first albums that was recorded using a 16-track recorder, and with digital recording now, like you can have unlimited tracks. It sort of doesn't seem like a big deal, but up until this time, 4 tracks was the standard. Sgt. Pepper was recorded only using 4 tracks. On Hot Rats, 4 tracks alone were devoted to the drums, and the remaining tracks were there for just Zappa to do this creative mastery of overdubbing and blending of instruments to get these totally new timbres. It's really just something, it's a feast. It's a feast for your ears. The opening track is Peaches and Regalia, and this is definitely Zappa's signature tune, and this is a great place to hear how he took multiple instruments and overdubbed and blended them to make them sound like just almost new things. The second track on Hot Rats is the only vocal, Captain Beefheart, musician and painter. He provides vocals on this, and it's a very sort of Howlin' Wolf sort of inspired blues tune that then expands into Zappa just taking a killer guitar solo. The rest of the album is sort of a blend between sort of more composed pieces and sort of more like rocking jam jazz bits. I really love this album. I think it still really is. It's hot, man. It's Hot Rats. And if you like this and you want some more sort of the Zappa jazz fusion, although it's peppered throughout his other albums after this point, there's an album called The Grand Wazoo, which really focuses on just sort of providing this material. Number 4. I'm sure that any of the Zappa nerds, hi Zappa nerds, any of you that are watching are probably freaking out that I haven't really talked about Freak Out, other than sort of briefly in the beginning. It's a super important album, right? It's perhaps the first double rock album, and Paul McCartney has been on record saying that if it hadn't been for listening to Freak Out, he wouldn't have pushed the Beatles to be more experimental, and Sgt. Pepper wouldn't have been created. But I'm not going to suggest that you start with Freak Out. I'm going to pick a different album, and that album is called We're Only In It for the Money. Now, why do I suggest this over Freak Out? Well, it's a little bit more pop, it's got some catchier melodies, but it's still political, and it's still very critical of the times and when it was the times for when it was made. It really attacks the establishment. It attacks hippie culture. Everything's under attack, and it's still got this sort of weird Frank bits, but it's a little shorter running time. It has the pop elements. If you like Rolling It for the Money, then that's when I would say go back and listen to Freak Out, the first Zappa album, and then listen to Absolutely Free, which is the second Zappa album. That'll help to sort of inform sort of how you got to Rolling for the Money, but I think you'll just have a better starting experience there. Other thing why I mention this is that presumably you will have also listened to Hot Rats at this point. We're Only In It for the Money was just made just 2 years prior. The leap from We're Only In It for the Money to Hot Rats is like enormous. People often talk about how the Beatles started, their career and where they ended their career, and like what amazing growth they had as a band. And I don't dispute that. I love the Beatles. But the amount that Zappa went from Whirling for the Money into Hot Rats, doing sort of like this psychedelic pop album. He didn't do drugs, by the way. To then doing this like jazz fusion album. Like, what? That's such a huge gap that was bridged. That's why I like him so much as an artist, because just incredibly talented, but so creative at the same time. So the cover of We're Only in It for the Money. So this is an obvious parody of Sgt. Pepper, and there's a little hidden gem. Jimi Hendrix, who was a friend of Zappa, he's tucked away. So before the album's release, the label was really nervous there would be a lawsuit. So Zappa called up Paul McCartney, just to make sure everything would be cool. But McCartney sort of pushed Zappa away, saying that this was something that the business managers should worry about. And this really frustrated Zappa, and because the label then ended up delaying the album's release for 5 months. And then the solution was that they took the outside artwork and they put it on the inside, and took the inside artwork and put it on the outside. Which, of course, at the time, if you were buying the vinyl, you'd be like, what am I? There's like a couple guys' random faces. But later releases, of course, fixed this, but it's sort of a very unique little tidbit there, which I like to mention because, Frank in The Mothers of Invention made Freak Out, which inspired Paul McCartney to push the Beatles into a new direction further to make Sgt. Pepper. And then Zappa sort of makes a little Sgt. Pepper parody, and then Paul McCartney's like, I don't want anyone to listen to this. So he sort of ends up delaying its release. So thanks, Paul. That was nice, Paul. Now, I love the Beatles, obviously. I obviously love Zappa. You can love both. Number 5. It was really, really difficult for me to decide what this final album was going to be. There's a lot to pick from. And I really wanted to make sure that I was showcasing the wide breadth of the music that Zappa created. And so for that, I chose The Yellow Shark. The Yellow Shark is a live recording of orchestral music. This would be like modern classical music. And it was released in November of 1993, 1 month before Frank Zappa died of cancer. He had prostate cancer. Frank might have just normally, if it had been the 1700s, he might have just been a classical composer. But thanks to electric guitars and doo-wop and all sorts of fun influences, we got this amazing breadth of material that he created. The Yellow Shark is this just touching, very personal and beautiful cap to his life. One of the reasons that Frank Zappa appeals to me so much, and classical music is actually how I got introduced into Zappa's music, but what did it for me was exploring and realizing how much he could make from his first days in his little Studio Z that he created on his own to, all the way up through to the end of his life, so that even now they've been continuing to release albums on a very regular basis. I mean, just such passion for creating music and art and film and doing all these things. It just makes me, every time I'm feeling tired and lazy and I don't want to do something, I think of Frank and I get up and I go to work. Plus, I really dig the music. Check out Frank Zappa. Please check out my channel for additional content like this. Obviously, subscribe, click the bell, and if you really, 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 really like this video, or you're just feeling generous, please feel free to visit me on Patreon, where you can help support me making more content like this. And as always, a tremendous thank you to everyone who is already over there doing so. All right, that's it for now. Thank you for watching.